Hello, good morning. Good morning, dear students. I hope that you're having a great time here in Ensenada and here at CETIS as well. Welcome to this conference or lecture on the Cali Baja region. And in order for you to have a broad understanding of the different scenarios, opportunities, realities, and challenges of this region, here we have a guest speaker who is Mario López. We would like to welcome Mr. Mario López, Professor Mario López, and he will give you a lecture on this topic, and I would like to say a few words about Mario. He's the founder of the Border Group 15 years ago. He's the first public relations firm, public relations cross-border firm in San Diego. And public affairs firm. He opened the first office of representation of the city of San Diego in Tijuana. He has worked in the Chamber of Representatives in the US and in the Mexican Congress. He is quite often invited by the TV, like Univision San Diego, and he's also a writer in El Financiero financial newspaper. He has a wide experience in the public and private sector in both sides of the border. He has participated in civic and business organizations also in both sides of the border. He studied at University of California, San Diego, and he has a Bachelor of Arts in Latin American History and also a diploma in political science from the Autonomous University of Madrid. Mario is a person that is well known to us at CETIS because he has worked in many areas that have to do with promoting the Cali Baja regional development. He has also been working for SEMPRA for several years in a high management position in public relations and public affairs. And he is also a professor at CETIS in the Tijuana campus, specifically in one program that we delivered completely in English. So by the way, if you happen to have someone who wants to study at an US accredited institution, which is the case of CETIS. CETIS is a US accredited institution. If you want to study in Mexico, in a US accredited institution, you can study in Tijuana or CETIS Mexicali, and you can study international business or industrial engineering totally in English. So Mario López is a professor of our Bachelor's in International Business at CETIS Tijuana, a global program. That's how we call these programs that are in English, global programs. So we are delighted to have Mario here. Very grateful to you, Mario, for accepting and making room in your busy agenda to be here at CETIS. Welcome. Thank you.
Gracias, Francisco. Buenos días, good morning. Raise your hand, who speaks Spanish? Wow, who speaks English? A little bit of everything, that's great. So you're very bilingual and binational, I hope, by the end of this conversation. I want to thank Maestro Francisco Vélez from CETIS University for inviting me to give a conversation with you today. The objective today is for you to think, to question, and also to ask more about what it means to live in one of the busiest border mega regions in the world. All of you guys are from California, is that correct? Yes. So California, it's a large border state, as we know, but most of the state geographically faces west towards the Pacific. So historically, and I think culturally, there's a lot more influence in some aspects, especially the economics of it, towards Asia and the Pacific Rim. Although, obviously, culturally and geographically, California was part of Mexico at some point and then part of Spain, or the other way around. The point is that we have long history with both the colonial era of the Spanish Empire and a brief part with the Mexican Republic and the Mexican Empire, because Mexico really did not have a very solid hold politically and administratively of California and the Californios, as the old-timers used to call before California became an independent republic and then joined the American Union. But let's start. So the idea behind this company that I started is because I grew up on both sides of the border. I grew up in Tijuana, but was born in San Diego, first generation Mexican-American. And I lived throughout my life on both sides of the border, which is this line, right? And we go back and forth across La Línea. We actually call it the line in Spanish, right? La Línea, because we see it as a line in the map. Over the course of my lifetime, it's become harder to cross that line, even for an American citizen like ourselves, because I just heard that you guys might be waiting for 2 hours to go back to your home. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's normal? Do you think it's just? Should we be waiting 2 hours to go back to our country if we really don't have anything to declare and we're legal citizens, in this case students? There's a lot of inefficiencies in the relationship, and the line is one of them. And when I thought about the name for the company, I thought, well, it has to be something that aligns to the actual line, right? So that's why we have this little motto about thinking about the border. And this is 15 years ago, okay? Way before the Trump era, where the border in Mexico and the Mexicans and immigrants have been redefined as the worst, right? There's a very negative narrative that was created with Trump 1 that still lingers and has brought enormous and tremendous negative effects to the relationship, obviously to the self-image of immigrants, and also to a lot of trade and commerce that crosses through this border. But we'll talk more about that as we move on. Ahí está. So the idea, the conversation is to talk about Cali Baja. Has anyone heard about this term before? Can you raise your hand? Where did you hear about it? Okay. Great. Has anyone else heard about this? Okay, so this is a name that was coined about maybe 18 years ago. It was based on a strategy, and it later became an economic development initiative to promote north of Baja with Southern California. So that's why it's Cali Baja as a mega region. I'll talk more about it. So the idea is to talk more about sort of where we're coming from and then what's at stake or what's the future of it. The other way around. So again, it's a public affairs firm. I started in 2010. I've done other things in the midst of it. I worked for a few mayors, worked in political campaigns, and then I worked for an energy company for 11 years doing public affairs on both sides of the border, very intensely in Ensenada, because Ensenada has an enormous energy hub, natural gas hub here. But this is actually the mega region that what we call as Cali Baja. This is actually from a initiative, as I mentioned, that was a legal 501c3 that started based on a grant from the U.S. Department of Commerce to help the Imperial Valley, which is this county, with its high unemployment rate. Imperial Valley has one of the highest unemployment rates in California, over 20%. And these are the two most southern counties in California: San Diego County with its 18 cities, Imperial County with its 6 cities, and then northern Baja. At that point, we only had 5 cities in northern Baja. Ensenada used to run all the way to the middle of the peninsula where Baja Sur starts, which was, to that point, one of the largest municipalities in the world. Now was divided up with 2 other additional cities: San Felipe, which is in the coast and the Sea of Cortez, and then San Quintin, south of Ensenada. So now we have 7 cities with 7 mayors in contrast. But the idea was to actually bulk together the infrastructure, the institutional capacity, the talent of both sides of the region to promote trade and investment when going abroad and promoting the region. So instead of San Diego going on its own, or Ensenada, or Mexicali, do it in a common strategy abroad. This has lost some energy in the last years. I think the negative narrative of the border has to do with losing some of the steam. But I think, and I'm a true believer, that the concept is worth continuing to educate, evolve, discuss, and sort of believe in what Cali Baja could be. Because if you understand the region in this context, then you better understand how you fit in the context and in the region, both academically at this point, but eventually professionally. I'm really happy that these students, that you guys are here from California. For many years, the Cal State system prohibited students from coming across because of the negative image of violence and drugs and so on in Baja. So this is a very good story of success of the border, again, becoming thicker and thinner as political things change, right? But again, going to the image of the border, we really have a negative image. All this from a Google search, was way before the Trump years. I've used this slide for many years, and it hasn't changed that much, right? We have a border that's very militarized, a border that's very aggressive, and a border, not only the border itself. Has anyone gone and seen the fence of the border where it starts? It's very impactful. But also, the challenge of the border, because it's really a more political challenge, because it really doesn't stop people from going. And you know why not? Because there's still people who get employed when they go on the other side. There's a dual narrative of us, America, not wanting undocumented immigrants, and the employers paying under the table, cash to all the millions of immigrants all throughout different sectors of economic society. California is the richest state, not only in the United States, as far as wealth. It's one of the richest states, if not in the world, because its economy is the size of larger than Japan. Japan has over 300 million people. California barely has 40 million people, and its economy is larger. And guess which is the state that has the largest number of documented immigrants? California. It's enormously how much our economy depends on the backs of these immigrants who right now are being raided and chased and terrorized throughout different sectors. So that's very important for us as fronterizos or borderlanders to understand, comprehend, and come to terms with, right? The narrative, right? This guy built his political campaign on building a wall. And who was going to pay for it? Mexico. In his political rallies, that's how he would close his rallies. Who's going to pay for it? And then people would say, Mexico, what are we going to do? Build the wall. It became a chant, mostly political, because he actually deported less people than President Obama did. Up until this year, where border raids and this image of there's less deportations than during the Obama years. So it's very political. than it actually is something of actually wanted to close the country to immigrations. Now, going back to the region, this is an old postcard that I found on how the region saw itself. For me, postcards, which I used to collect, there's less and less postcards now because people don't send a lot of actual mail now. But when you used to travel abroad, you would buy a postcard and write someone a message. And this is a postcard in Tijuana that had an overview of Tijuana and San Diego. That's why it has a little sign on top. So you can actually figure out, wow, geez, there's really no border there. It's just a big, sprawling one-city community, right? And these are the two mottos of the city. This is in the early 90s. Tijuana still had a bull ring in the middle of Tijuana. If you would see this picture from right now, you would not recognize the skyline in Tijuana because of the amount of density and high rises coming up. But at that point, Tijuana used to call itself the busiest, the most visited city in the world because it had a lot of people coming in, although 98% of them are people just going back and forth, like myself, who I live in Tijuana, go to work and come back. And Tijuana's motto, which is America's finest city, it's interesting that this motto was come up with in the 70s because San Diego really did not have a convention center or a place to actually host big events in the 70s, and the Republican National Convention was looking for a place back in the 70s. And it ended up going to San Luis, Missouri, or Kansas or something, and civic leaders in San Diego felt actually betrayed that this big event that was a national did not want to go to San Diego because this really wasn't nothing to go there for. At that point, San Diego was a Navy town, a very small, sort of sleepy community. And among many other things that San Diego did to change is that they actually built a convention center next to downtown, which started revitalizing, which is now Gaslamp Quarter in downtown San Diego, with a huge convention center right in downtown that brings millions and millions of people in tourism. This week, there's a huge event. It's called Comic-Con. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's a huge media, comics, pop event in San Diego, very successful, brings hundreds and thousands of tourists and millions of dollars. And so it changed itself, San Diego, to a certain degree. And going back to this image of one region to a satellite image, you really see that the Tijuana, which is here, is really united to the San Diego metropolitan region. The only blank strip of lands that you see is because of topographical issues, a lot of hills and valleys and canyons, right? But here's one single city that's united. One of the border crossings is here, the other one is at Otay over here, and now there's going to be a third one, which will be the last commercial and vehicle border crossing between Tijuana and San Diego is being developed. We'll talk more about it. And Ensenada is south of here, right? But as you can see, it's really one metropolitan region that was first conversed or first envisioned as being together in an essay. Okay. In an essay that was written in this is this. And this is a landscape architecture's version of the region where back in 1974, Reed thought how the San Diego region could booster itself in connection with Tijuana. One of the interesting things about this essay called Temporary Paradise is that the consultants who were urban planners that were hired to do a rethinking of San Diego actually included Tijuana, not because they were asked, but when they came and traveled throughout the region, they crossed the border, and Tijuana was growing 5 times the rate as San Diego. And Tijuana at that point did not have enough urban infrastructure to actually deal with that enormous amount of immigration. And the region Tijuana was growing is to satisfy the goods needed north of the border, because all that growth in Tijuana was industrial growth for export companies and processing plants in Tijuana that were feeding American customers and clients. This is way before NAFTA. This is in the 70s, okay? So back at that point, they proposed a new port of entry, a twin airport, and then a joint binational park along the Tijuana River estuary. If you go back and see this image, the only reason this part is not developed is because the Tijuana River flows northbound into California, into this estuary that flows into the Pacific Ocean. This estuary is the last buffer of urban area because they can't develop in a, in a natural estuary. But as you can see in the essay that they built, they even propose a few parks along the river. This essay was the inspiration, that's myself. I worked for the city of San Diego as a director of binational affairs, and this essay was the inspiration for looking at a different way of engaging San Diego with Tijuana, which actually, is the heart of the Cali-Baja region. So this is what some of the architects and urbanists, this is the son, Donald Appleyard, of one of the original, Bruce Appleyard here. He's the son of Donald Appleyard, one of the urbanists who was hired. He used to work at MIT. And anyway, so we reissued the essay in both Spanish and English, the 40th anniversary of it. And this is an image about image and contrast, right? These are images of different border towns in Baja. Here we have Tijuana, who's historically had an enormous tourism sector built on the needs of Americans, mostly Navy and military, because San Diego used to be the largest Navy station before going out during the Second World War towards the Pacific War. So most of the people who were part of the Pacific War and Second World War, they left in ships out of San Diego. And then we also have an enormous military camp called Camp Pendleton up in northern San Diego, which are the Marines. So we've historically always been the city of sin for those sailors who go out to war, right? Mexicali is a more institutional city. Mexicali is the capital of Baja California, more infrastructure, a little bit better planning, not as chaotic as Tijuana. And Ensenada, started as a fishing port, then we have a trading port, but really has evolved on tourism, and especially because of Valle Guadalupe. This center where we're at right now is built on even having a master's on wine and wine production because of the enormous economics of wine producing and tourism in the region. I don't have an old postcard of Ensenada, but all these lands, and you probably have walked because you're staying around Puerta del Sol or Rey Sol, but all these lands were beaches. These are artificial, walkways that were built around the original beach and the shoreline. Centro Cultural Riviera, which I hope you guys identify, have been a beautiful building from the 1920s, was actually a hotel that had a beachfront at that point. But again, the image. San Diego rebuilt its image after the 70s in the last 20 years to become really an enormous tourism hub based on Gaslamp Quarter, outdoor sports. San Diego has always had beautiful beaches, but a lot of beach culture and outwear and being outside, right? And San Diego was very keen in the 1960s because they brought in SeaWorld as a theme park in what was then the new Mission Bay Aquatics development. The place where SeaWorld is at, I don't know if you've been to SeaWorld, it's beautiful, but it's around a place that was actually built to attract tourism. And San Diego grew as a tourism destination. All the skyline, which is mostly hotels, were built there because of the convention center that we talked about a little while ago. And we have also institutions from early in the 20th century, like Balboa Park, they're still there. We're a lot of cultural institutions. Ahí está. But guess what? We were built very differently, San Diego than Ensenada. Ensenada's older than San Diego. San Diego was discovered during the same trips where the Spanish discovered Ensenada, Juan Cabrillo, which is now at the end of Ensenada, of San Diego. There's a place called Point Loma, and we have a monument to Juan Cabrillo, who discovered San Diego Bay. He also discovered Ensenada Bay. But there's a reason why we were developed so differently, having very similar shorelines, right? What would have happened if the Mexican-American War had not happened, if that line was not there, and San Diego would still be part of Mexico? Would it look like this under Mexican operation rules, politics, and Mexicanos? Or would Ensenada look like this if California would have taken Baja? There were many expansionist movements of folks wanting to take the Baja Peninsula, be part of California in the United States. There was even an invasion of Baja California in 1911. It's called the filibusters, that took Tijuana and Mexicali for about 2 weeks. Oh, se me fue. No sé si. So, let's go there. So, for me, I actually put this image together as a contrast to think about why it looks so different. Now, bear in mind, one is not necessarily better than the other. This creates more wealth, right? These are high-end business apartments and retail spaces and so on. But it all depends on how you want to look and live. What I do know is that it's very similar. It's very similar as far as geography and the coastal area. So now, these are the port operations. Which city has more port operations and maritime trade? This is the port of San Diego. Very small port operations, very small space. This is the port of Ensenada. Large operations, connection with Asia. What has built more wealth at the end for the local community? You can see it here. You can have a large operations of port development, but that doesn't necessarily develop the city itself. What was the key thing about San Diego and what they did with their coastal area? The Port of San Diego, who manages the maritime operations, also is the land developer for the shoreline along the Port of San Diego. And they decided to develop the Port of San Diego more on the tourism side after they built the convention center. And they charge rents and leases on all the operations around the port that generate millions and millions of revenue. But these operations create jobs in the hotel industry and restaurants and everything related to the people who visit, right? This creates jobs for people that work at the actual port, but all this trade and commerce leaves Ensenada. Some of it stays and gets manufactured into final goods and so on, but most of it leaves. It doesn't necessarily create local wealth, right? So it's a way of looking at how you have things and how you integrate them or not into this type of city that you want to have. Going back to the border and La Línea, again, La Línea, right? This is these used to be part of the vehicle traffic. I took that picture many years ago. But it was very interesting, that image actually crosses with the reality of the border, right? This image right here is the image you see when you come back from Ensenada to Tijuana doing the toll highway. That's how the city of Tijuana, it's actually crashes into the reality, the political reality of the border, right? We have the Tijuana River Estuary, so we can't have development here. It's a little buffer. And then we have the San Isidro Hills and then Otay Hills, so we have pieces and patches of undeveloped land on the U.S. side. In other port towns, or border towns, I would say, along the U.S.-Mexico border, both cities are crashed together to each other. You would have direct houses on both sides because you don't have the land constraints that you would have in Tijuana. So this is unique along the border. And again, postcards and the images of the border, right? This is an old postcard from the original border between San Diego and Tijuana and how it changed in the 60s to this new modernistic border that was actually torn down a few years ago to build the new one that we have right now. So the border keeps changing as far as infrastructure, but in the operations of the border, they become sometimes more inefficient. It was way easier to cross the border back then and here than it is right now, even with more infrastructure, technology, staff, personnel, and so on, right? I grew up, crossing this border as I was a kid, and even born in San Diego, I would just cross by saying U.S. citizen, and they would believe me, and my mom, who is Mexican. We lost that. It would be crazy right now to think that you can cross in a car and say, American citizen, where's your documents? I don't have them. You have to believe me. Sheesh. You'll get detained for a few hours. You'll eventually get across. It's not going to be a fun experience. Why? Because we lost one of the most important things that we used to have in the border, which is trust. We lost the trust between U.S. and Mexico in many aspects, for many things that I'm not going to get into. But where did the border start? If we go back, and I mentioned the Spanish Empire and the Mexican Republic, what is now the U.S.-Mexico border was not a border because all of it was part first of the Spanish Republic Empire, and then the Mexican Empire, and then the Mexican Republic. But as we know, this is the Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Alta California. All this was part of the Spanish Empire at some point. Later became the Mexican Empire. And the expansionism of the colonies were first the United States. They bought, it's called the Louisiana Purchase. They bought Florida, New Orleans from the French, and they wanted more land. There was not a lot of people in the colonies, actually. But this is an expansionist way of looking mentally at the entire continent should be ours. That eventually happened. Mexico began a war with Texas. The Texas-U.S. war. It led to the U.S.-Mexico war. The American army went all the way to Mexico City, invaded and took the capital. And being in the capital, they forced Mexico to sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which eventually redrew the line, taking more than half of the Mexican land, which is now the Southwest states, and the rest is history. But that actually is contrast what we saw before with trade and commerce of all the 50 states in the nation, including Hawaii and Alaska, with Mexico. Because of the new free trade agreement signed in 92, started in 94, we have an enormous amount of trade between the U.S. and Mexico, where all the states have trade with Mexico. And trade means workers, employees. Each one of these states has hundreds and thousands of jobs that depend with Mexico on trade. And it's interesting that even though all this wealth, it's almost more than 6 million jobs in the U.S., which is not a small number, have to do with trade with Mexico. Most of the congressional districts, especially those Republicans who are voting against trade, who are in favor of tariffs and everything that Trump too is doing, they don't even know that they're hurting themselves because they have jobs in their own districts. This is a very important map that was developed at the Mexican Embassy that should be updated and that should be even as a roadmap and how you encounter the elected officials of all of these, especially those that are against free trade and commerce because they're hurting themselves. This is when the free trade agreement was signed. This is back in 1992 in San Antonio, Texas, between President Salinas de Gortari, Bush I, Prime Minister of Canada, and their heads of commerce. And that changed Mexico's future forever because it tied economically our economic models and routes between the three countries in a very successful way because commerce grew and jobs were created on the three countries.
That trade deal was renegotiated under Trump 1, first with President Peña Nieto. The negotiation was actually with him and was finally implemented under President AMLO. Now we have the revision of that trade agreement that Trump himself said it was the best deal he had ever made, and now he's criticizing it again, saying it's the worst deal. As many things that happen in this crazy world in DC, right? When you say one thing one day, and you say another thing the next day, just like this cartoon. So that's where we're at. Again, the success, the trade agreements did work. They're not a development agreements. It doesn't have to say that there's not going to be any poverty in any of the three countries. It's just a trade agreement, and for the fact of what it wanted to do, it actually worked. Look at these numbers. These are billions of dollars between the three countries. So these value chains work. They create jobs that depend on each other. This is an infographic that it's used a lot all over the place in this Cali-Baja region because it's based just on the Cali-Baja region. It's, even though it's not updated, and every time I talk, I say that we need to update this. It just gives you a snapshot of how big the region is as far as 7 million people, 250 billion of economic output annually, and about $70 billion of cross-border trade that goes in and out in both directions through our trade ports along Otay, Tecate, and Mexicali. It talks about engineering degrees, STEM, of all of the region. So for me, understanding and keeping track of the data is very important for taking decisions, right? Especially for elected officials and people who actually do policy, that unfortunately not all the time do they get access to these type of information because it's not readily available. This was done as part of a study between the University of San Diego, USD, with the San Diego Chamber of Commerce and a few other organizations. But again, one of the things that happened after Trump won is that Mexico actually became the #1 trading partner for the U.S., outpacing China and Canada, which was amazing. These are the type of goods between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. Seaports, you can't see it, but this is a trade via sea. China is obviously #1 with the U.S. Because of that enormous part of California. Everything that the U.S. trades with China comes via California, right? Long Beach, the big ports in Long Beach and L.A. and San Francisco and up north. These are the airports. Also by plane, China is still the largest trading partner. By land, Mexico outpaced China and Canada. This is from 2 years ago. This is land ports of entry. The largest land port of entry between Mexico and the U.S. is Laredo, open 24/7, where almost 40% of the trade and commerce between the countries crosses. We have California and Mexico, which is Otay Mesa. That's the third largest port up in operations. And California, this is a little bit outdated, but again, about 40 million people. Our gross economic output is more than 3 billion at this point. That's why we're the 4th largest economy in the world. It's a nation state in itself, the size of California, the political purchasing power, and also the intellectual capacity. One of the reasons the economy of California is so diversified is because of, as we know, most of the high-tech companies in these countries started in Silicon Valley back in the 60s, which developed our digital revolution throughout the world, right? Something to think about locally, and I'm gonna be winding down to Ensenada. Ensenada has a unique position because it's south of California. It has access to the Asia because it has a seaport, and to Latin America because we have a seaport. But at the same time, it has, I think, some internal identity issues as far as how we want to develop. Because on one hand, we have a very nice lifestyle of leisure, the beach, surfing, Valle Guadalupe for a certain part of the community, which is pretty laid back, and you don't want really more industrial, you don't want more trucks, you don't want more investment in large infrastructure projects like Sempra or the expansion of the port. So these are some protests of the last few months of people not wanting the expansion of the Puerto del Sausal. There's two ports, the large commercial port that you saw, cranes, operation with Asia, and there's a smaller port with local companies that was announced that was going to be expanded. And there's enormous protests and unrest because there's a surfing community, there's an environmental community who does not want more industrial development. So there's this clash between Ensenada's original port operations, and you see at the entrance as you go into the city, all the trucks coming in and out, with this sense of lifestyle of how people want Ensenada to stay as it is, so you can have a better, more leisure, relaxing beach lifestyle. So there's this contrast. And it's been around for a few years, and it affected Sempra, with Sempra once expanding its operations north of Ensenada. But going back to Cali Baja and relationships, this is a governor, Marina El Pilar. When she first got elected, it was during COVID. She immediately went to Sacramento to build relationships with the state of California and up in Sacramento. This is former Governor Brown, who never really visited Mexico, but he went to China for about 10 times, so his focus was on Asia. But he did invite the president of Mexico to Los Angeles before he ran for re-election for whatever reason, right? And then this is an important picture of a signing of the Commission of the Californias. These are the governors of Baja, ex-governor of Baja, Gavin Newsom of California, and this was the governor of Baja Sur, when they re-established a commission called the Commission of the Californias, this is in 2019, to restart a strategy between the three states. Unfortunately, and I was part of that negotiations and conversation, but unfortunately, it never prevailed because COVID hit in early 2020, so there was really no initiatives that came out of this signing, but the document's there. The possibilities are there, but the potential, I think, needs to be on our side, Francisco, to come up with strategies and initiatives to actually put on these. They're not blank pieces of paper. They can't just look at because of the photo, but to put initiatives on there. That's there as a potential. Images of the border, the inefficiency of the border, remember we talked about? It should not take you guys 2 hours to go back home. Your students, you're here for legitimate academic purposes. Hopefully you don't have anything to declare. Why would it take you 2 hours to go back? It's not fair. It's a very dumb way to operate. And we need resources to be focused on the actual people who want to pass things across the border that should not be coming across, not folks like you. The image, right? The image, this negative, reinforced army-like border region, right? This is a picture I took many years ago when, by coincidence, they were actually remodeling the fence. So they had no fence. Obviously, you had a lot of Border Patrol people there. But when I took that photo, I said, sheesh, doesn't that look good and beautiful? That should be the way it should be at some point. If we would have a better understanding about our, especially human capital, Mexico has a very young population based compared to the US, so we have more workers for the next decades. It would make sense to have an immigration agreement for temporary workers, because most immigrants who go to the US, especially from Mexico, they don't want to live in the US forever. In fact, historically, they would just move to the US, work for certain crops following the agriculture season, then go back home. It was only when it was harder to get back across that they started bringing their wife and kids and families. So suddenly from having 1 million, 2 million documented people, we have 10, because everyone brought their family. Before, it was just temporal. People did not really want to come to live in the US. They wanted to come and work, make money, go back home, improve their lifestyle, and then be able to do that. And that started because of a program called the Bracero program, where the U.S. needed help workers, agricultural workers, during the Second World War. That program entailed people to come across. It's a program that operated for 20 years. And in 1964, they said, we don't need you guys anymore. And people were deported. But it left cycles in a lot of towns throughout Mexico of people going abroad to the U.S., working and coming back. Anyways, very fortified border. And then you have the media, right? This is from a program at National Geographic that you would think would be very culturally sensitive about the border and this border wars. I mean, even the name, right? That create this myth about how there's an invasion of Mexico inviting the U.S. and immigrants, which is not true. And then we have that in contrast where the soft power of Baja and Mexico of food, gastronomy, craft beer, wine. I hope that one of the reasons that Cetis Ensenada is attractive is because Ensenada's a beautiful place, beautiful weather, nice climate. You have a lot of amenities. And food. Anthony Bourdain, I hope most of you know who he is. He's a very famous chef that really revolutionized the way people thought about food and the world. He was very vocal. When he came to the region, he just felt in love with the food and the people. There was music playing when you guys came in of a group called Nortec. It's a group from Tijuana, inspired on norteño music. This is one of the musicians who was one of the tour guides for Anthony Bourdain when he was in Baja. And then this is just the border. Then you have, this is from 2013. So at some point, from the editor of Wired magazine, at some point, people were embracing the fact that Mexico and the U.S. actually could be really good technological partners, way before the Trump years, right? Because there's capacity. This is a few headlines when I worked for the mayor of San Diego of initiatives that we were doing with Tijuana to highlight the level of the relationship, including working on binational Olympic Games. Actually, for the 2028 Olympics, they're not going to be in LA. San Diego and Tijuana started working in a bid to do it on our own. Data, these are just a few studies of data and studies that we don't necessarily have access to and when taking decisions on the border, but that they're there. This is actually interesting. So Mexico and the state of California have agreed on a third border crossing called Otay Mesa East in San Diego, or Otay Mesa Dos in Mexico. And yet in Mexico built 98% of the infrastructure. And on the California side, we don't even know when it's going to start. California has invested over $500 million on the access road to a border that's not built yet. And Mexico, again, has almost finished the project. So we have a lot of this coordination even in how we plan infrastructure between the countries, even though we've been building border crossings for 140 years or since we've had the relationship. Again, the future and the border. This is an image of the same line where the fence is at in between Playas and San Diego of how it used to be when they built something called Friendship Park. That park was designed by both countries, and when it's a symbol to the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico when they built that park in the 70s. And the First Lady of President Nixon came to inaugurate that park with the First Lady of Mexico. That park has now been almost destroyed because there's 3 layers of fences at this point. That was one of the parks where people used to come across, have a picnic, and be able to see your family member on the other side of the wall because you couldn't cross, but at least you can see each other, right? Now it's not even that at this point. But it's very symbolic for me how it used to be, because this is the way how we borderlanders should demand that our border continue to be. Even this, it has a small fence, right? But this is now on the Mexican side. The wall is maybe a meter north of it, but I really like that image. And that's it. Questions? Hopefully you'll have lots of questions. If not, I'll ask you, but the idea is to have a conversation between you and I. Y bueno, thank you for your patience and your attendance. Gracias.